Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. And this is called Information, the one true asset to rule them all. It is construction focused, but I'm hoping the principles and ideas discussed can be applied to other situations. So my name is Emma Hooper and I work in the construction industry as a digital information specialist at BRYAN Digital. BRYAN Digital is a brand of BRYAN architects, and my role is split between being an information manager on construction projects, doing R&D, and also I'm part of various committees, like Julian said, which evoke standardisation and open shareable information within the industry. And I love information. I'm fascinated by the mechanics and the science of it and how it all joins together to make patterns. And there's no bigger puzzle than that of construction information. I wanted to start by looking at information at the organisational level. Organisations themselves are complex systems in which information is constantly flowing through. And information should be viewed as an important asset in its own right. And given the proper attention, it can actually add tremendous value to a business, ensuring that the right person or technology has the right information at the right time, and it can be exchanged seamlessly between them. But how much attention is really given to the information, and in particular the quality of it? Often it gets taken for granted and rarely viewed holistically. Information and its processes underpin an organisation. So that's looking at information in one organisation, but what about an entire industry? What about construction? Or as I like to call it, the tangled web of information chaos. I love the industry. It's remarkable the things we can do on such a large scale, from amazing design to mind-blowing feats of engineering. And we all see the outputs in the buildings and the infrastructure around us. But I see buildings and infrastructure as huge containers of self-generating information, and that information is ever-changing. And as for construction projects, they are one big information ecosystem, which is made up of inputs, processes, and outputs. The building blocks of this ecosystem is information, and I like to think of information as a natural occurring phenomenon. It's everywhere and creates our reality, yet we can't access it until the human brain has processed it. Nowadays, we're constantly exposed to huge amounts of it, and as a consequence, we process a fair bit that we don't need and miss the bits that we do. It also makes us less appreciative of it. Information is cheap and we take it for granted. And this is no different to what happens in construction, and I'm sure this has similarities with other industries. Viewing this from this perspective, I see so many fundamental problems within construction projects which need addressing, such as the right skills aren't brought on board at the right time. We have fragmented supply chains where information just gets lost. It's very much reactive rather than proactive approach. People don't like planning and thinking about the bigger picture. Current procurement methods stifle innovation. Companies and people have hidden agendas, and a blame culture persists. There's a real lack of digital literacy at really basic levels. We're one of the least digitised industries on the planet. And the sheer gulf between theory and reality. We have groups looking at things like linked data and AI, yet in reality, the majority on site still use paper drawings. And above all, a lack of understanding with regard to the power of good quality information, which I'm going to talk about now. In addition to this, people require more information than ever before, but don't specify what they actually want. And technology is generating more data than ever before. Trouble is, these two aren't in sync at the moment, so the data being produced isn't satisfying what's needed, which leaves masses of messy information. Exploring this mass of information further, we'll begin to see that it's actually made up of a lot of duplicated and irrelevant information, which creates information waste, and construction projects are overflowing with it. Those who work on construction projects have to start seeing themselves as information specifiers, receivers, and information providers or creators, and get out of the mindset of sending everything out to everyone at the same time. Information needs to be rationalised and filtered much better, so only relevant information is sent out. And too much becomes overwhelming and often leads us information blind, and we start to miss the information we really need. And just think of all the times when you get bombarded with emails, discussions, or have to read huge documents. In addition, information is often exchanged which is incorrect and incomplete because we often don't check it and because of time pressures, which on the receiving side leads to interpretation, assumption, and confusion, which creates increased risk. It's also not being managed correctly, so it ends up veering off in the wrong direction and getting lost. So the next person who requires it doesn't receive it when they need it. And it's a bit like trying to herd thousands of sheep at once with no plan. And it starts breaking the ecosystem down, which means that the exchanges aren't working as efficiently as they should, making us unproductive, affecting programme, cost, health and safety, and on rare occasions, catastrophe. Two factors behind this, and the first is the people-to-people exchange of information. Outdated procurement models and passing on risk has just increased the sheer amount of organisations involved on projects, the barriers, and created convoluted lines of communication. Communication is the act of exchanging knowledge between people, and when problems occur on projects, it's normally always to do with the breakdown of this. However, I want to focus on this, the communication between technology. In this case, even at one simple exchange, we can have problems getting the right data out of one system and then into another. And as an industry, we have massive problems with interoperability, and as a result, we struggle to get our systems to work together, which the cost of dealing with on projects is significant. This presentation, I want to focus on the mechanics of the information itself and how the way it is formed has created this problem and how we can mitigate it. Over the years, every specialism, or even sometimes company, has become an information silo. They all have their own particular language, classifications, and conventions. And this has developed ad hoc without consideration of the other silos and the overall bigger picture. And to join it up, that's where people come in, with our ability to read between the lines, to interpret and assume. But this introduces a whole chunk of risk. And you could kind of get away with this more when projects were much simpler. So to help reduce this and make our projects more efficient, as an industry, we've moved towards technology to help us. But in simple terms, computers don't like unstructured, random and varied information across so many different scenarios. What we're currently doing through a process called Building Information Modelling, or BIM, is making as much of this information as structured as possible in a consistent way so that technology can understand it. But that's easier said than done, because it's about converting the chaos into order. And to do this, we need to remove the silos, bring the information together to see what we have, rationalise it, and define what it is in accordance with logical rules, such as what the function of something is, rather than the varied nature of the English language or just bad habits which have evolved over time. And if that wasn't enough, we also need to join the information up so it becomes more useful. And this is where we'll gain the real benefit, because it's the connections which allow us to perform more complex queries and gain more insight from the wider bank of information, which leads to much more value. And this will be the key to everything we do in the future. But that's the easy bit. Like anything to do with change, we need to first address this by changing our mindsets towards information. Starting with the main source, the client. They need to recognise the value in their information and data and regard it as an asset, therefore properly defining what they need for their purposes, but either to support their operations, their organisation, or to add value when they sell it on. Secondly, project team members need to have a better appreciation of what they are creating and using. Before creating anything, they need to think, is it needed and what happens to it after it's passed on? And this is all about working collaboratively with information and remembering it's always for a purpose. And to help this process of change, rules and standardisation is required, which in turn gives consistency, repeatability and predictability. Three things the industry is crying out for. Because when you're trying to develop strategies for both people and technology like I do, you would go insane without them. Consistency creates reoccurring patterns and logic to provide order, and this allows us to search, filter and sort our information so we can find it much easier. Predictability allows us to know what to expect so we can plan the process from start to finish. It gives us more certainty and reduces the risk of any nasty surprises causing problems. And you can argue that construction is unique as the product we produce varies, but there is a certain amount of activity and information which is the same on every project. And repeatability allows the same process to be used again and again, either within the same project or across projects. So you don't have to waste time coming up with a new one time and time again, and then communicating it time and time again. It also allows people to become familiar with the process, so the learning curve is reduced each time and the process speeds up. It also means individual organisations can move from project to project and client to client without having to change their internal processes, which adds cost. This reduces the time the delivery team need to get to grips with new processes so they can start straight away, which reduces the risk of doing things wrong. You know what's expected of you, and it's one less thing to worry about. If we have common frameworks for this, which allow people and technology to plug into other projects, it's much easier, and then it saves us from having to reinvent the wheel every time. It starts to give us tried and tested methods for managing the whole information ecosystem, all the exchanges, interconnections, and intricacies. And all the principles I've talked about are striving towards this, a structured information layer for industry, in which people and technology can operate from in the context of a project. And when projects are put together, we should think about this in the same way as the project framework. It needs to be considered at the start before any information is produced. The problem is this information layer is hidden and most don't know it exists. As humans, we relate to things far better if we can see them, if it's tangible, which is why when it comes to information, we think of the tools first above the information itself. But information is its own thing and doesn't rely on software applications to define it. They are just tools which help process it. And as a result, what we tend to see are requirements and strategies built around the applications. But since these have developed around their own language and rules, these too become mini information silos which struggle to share information between them. And this is why we have such problems with interoperability. Everything is using its own information layer, its own unique puzzle pieces. And because of this, projects are often defined around a single application's information layer, becoming closed off from anything else. Trouble is, this will only be adequate for a select number of activities, and you should always need that application to access the information. You should be able to access information regardless of the software. The data and the information it provides are far more important. And as a result, we focus on more peer-to-peer solutions, where each exchange is a tailored solution. And even then, you can't be guaranteed that the data will be in the right place. And managing all these permutations isn't sustainable, and we're not looking at the bigger picture. APIs and add-ins do not solve this. They still need a base standard. Instead, the software should plug in and serve the information, not the other way around. So what's in this information layer? We're going to concentrate on three areas: the breakdown of the information, taxonomy, the grouping and ordering of the information, and ontology. For this presentation, I'm talking about it in the sense of adding additional information and joining it up. It's not a true ontology because the semantic connections are not there, but it's a start. So I want to delve into each of these in a little bit more detail. So the breakdown of information. I want to be clear, this is something I've come up with to help distinguish it better. It's not a standard. If we take a single piece of information and analyse it, it can be described using these facets. Its format, how it's transported either physically or digitally. Its form, how it's packaged up and communicated to us. Its content or its overall content, and this is such an important facet, yet it's one we're not that great at defining. What is the information about? And its content breakdown. This is what imparts the knowledge and tells you what you need to know, from the words in a report to the lines on a drawing, or the 3D content in a geometrical model. And for models, this contains hierarchies of objects, which themselves contain content. Geometrical and alphanumerical data all linked by relationships. And defining the extent or the detail of this content is where the majority of the complexity lies. And this is what the level of information need framework in ISO 19650 helps us to do. When we refer to information, we generally mix up these facets because they can be difficult to distinguish. And the way we all view information is subjective. It's based on our training, environment, and discipline. We all use different information languages and we all want to access information from different starting points. But when creating structured information, we do need common starting points and language, otherwise you'd never be able to create it. And this is why we need well-defined classification in industry. And this is basically objects or things arranged by similar themes and concepts, which can become progressively more granular and also could be arranged in lists. And one of the most well-known is the Dewey Decimal System used in libraries. A primary classification system, which is free to access across the whole AEC and FM industry, is critical to the information layer to provide a consistent language and structure from a building type through to spaces, right down to products and across documentation. It also starts to provide order to all this sheer amount of stuff. It's kind of like the basic building blocks of information management. The problem we have at the moment is we kind of have too many of these lists, or we just create bespoke ones each time and bring them together. They're structured in completely different ways. But we could just map them, can't we? Well, having done this, I think it just introduces risk, as there are many different outcomes. So you have one-to-one mapping, which is great, but this is rare. And then there is one-to-many or many-to-many, which need a human to make a decision, so it can't be automated. Or no mapping at all, which is where things slip through the net. Or if we zoom in, because the two lists are at different levels of granularity, you're never comparing apples with apples, so the mapping is unlikely to be correct anyway. And having all these lists, that's great, but we do need to go further. Our information is also extremely interrelated. So an instance of a pump is associated with space and a pump type. The space is located on a building story and may be part of a zone. The story is part of a facility and it sits on a site. The pump will also be part of a system, have detailed classification assigned to it, and also be referenced in documents. It will have basic information like name, description, and ID, and properties like pressure. It might also have risk associated to it. And that's just one pump. Now think of everything else which makes the facility and how everything interlinks. These links or relationships are so important, and when these aren't recognised, we miss out on so much more useful information, which can make our projects perform so much better. And the concept I've described in information science terms is similar to an ontology, nodes connected to others via relationships, and you will hear this term far more in the future. And I think of it as the digital heart, and it's what the information layer is all about. To get all this right, and we have a sound basis to convert the chaos into order, logic, and repeatable patterns to really get the best out of technology, to make projects so much more efficient. And there is something in the industry which can help provide a solution to this. And this is what I want to focus on now. It's called Industry Foundation Classes, and I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of digital construction. Some people will think, well, it's just a file format, what's so special about it? And others might think it's a dumb 3D geometrical model that you can't do anything with. And I'll be honest, I remember thinking like that once upon a time. So I want to explain what it actually is. And if you remember one thing about IFC, it should be this: it's not a file format. It's instead a data structure, a digital representation of a built asset. And it's like a map which lists the building elements, their properties, and the connections. And we actually call this map a schema. And this is represented by the blue circle. It contains 4 important parts: entities, attributes, basic properties, which are all linked via relationships. And because it can't predefine everything, there is the option to add custom properties. It provides a data architecture for several formats. 2 main ones are STEP, which is what we think of as IFC, and XML, these other modern formats in development. RDF, XML, and Turtle are particularly exciting as these are the formats for linked data, where we'll have much better semantic connections, where the data will have meaning. And when 2 applications can read IFC, it improves interoperability. The receiving platform knows where to look for the data it needs and what the relationships are so it too can make sense of it. And this allows us to automate tasks such as checking, analysing large data sets and carrying out predictions across a whole project. Even if you have platforms that claim to open every file format under the sun, how do they know where to find specific data and what the relationships are to start to make sense of it? We end up having to create those peer-to-peer bespoke mapping between each one, and there would be endless permutations. And of course, software is constantly being updated, so the mappings may keep changing. IFC also enables us to filter what information we need. It's a bit like being in a sweet shop with a paper bag and selecting what sweets you want. The IFC schema is huge, therefore it can't all be implemented within software. Model view definitions are subsets of the schema which contain specific rules for more focused purposes. And when we exchange IFC models, we'll create them in line with the rules of one of these mini schema. So this is all well and good, but how do these concepts of the information layer fit into real life projects? In ISO 19650, we have the project information standard, and this is where it should be stated that IFC will be used on the project as that consistent information layer. Starting with the purpose, and exchange information requirement is defined. And this could be, for example, asset management, planning construction works, or for costing. The pieces of information which are needed to fulfill these purposes are specified across the different facets by a level of information need framework, which breaks the information down into its component parts. We also need to use classification to give order and a consistent language to the lists of object hierarchies. And for this, IFC can be used as a starting point. The information required will be a mixture of structured and unstructured information. And for the structured information, the model view definition needs to be stated. This is so that the delivered information will be put together in the right way in accordance with the schema rules. Think of exchange information requirements as multi-dimensional shopping lists for information. These requirements are then handed over or exchanged to those who will actually deliver the actual information. And it's now the turn of the delivery side to work out how they're going to provide it in terms of the who, when and how. A big part of this is looking at the layers of information from a container perspective, the strategy around this, taking into account responsibility, program and software. They will produce unstructured and structured information deliverables, including IFC models, in accordance with the correct MBD, which contains only the relevant information as per the exchange information requirements. This is then issued back to complete the information exchange, where it's checked against the original requirements. And because the original requirements were defined using IFC, and some of the delivered information is received using IFC, this information is much easier to check. So in essence, the EIR states which bits of information are required using the level of information framework in accordance with IFC. The MBD provides the relevant data structure to exchange and deliver the information using software. And this means we're only ever exchanging the relevant information, which also helps with security, usability, and keeps model sizes down. And there are plans to alter this in IFC as the concept of an MBD is static and requirements are much more dynamic. So basically, whenever structured information is being dealt with, IFC can be used so all processes use the same consistent information layer throughout, from defining information requirements, planning, information delivery, the delivery itself, and very importantly, checking the information. And at BRYAN Digital, we use IFC for all information management activities to maintain that golden thread. The more we can control and standardise the information, the more it can be checked in a more automated, intelligent way against the use cases defined in the information requirements. And this makes exchanging machine-readable information so much more efficient, as there's just one structure throughout. So we have our answer to information exchange between technology systems, but there's also much more information and value we can unlock. So in terms of models, I see them as data sets which are wrapped up in geometry. And when we author geometrical models, we're basically building up databases of design information just in a visual way. And we call these primary models. But we don't just use these. There are many other secondary model databases, like for geometry coordination, construction planning, cost, thermal analysis, or asset management. Different parts of the primary model databases are required to be exported for these secondary uses, and this should be defined in the exchange information requirements. And in terms of ISC, this is where the MBD is exchanged. Before it is received, the model exchange is checked against the information requirements. When compliant, it's imported into the receiving secondary application, and this completes the information exchange. People generally require unstructured information like a drawing or report, and this can be exported from either model as the final output. However, we don't make enough use of these secondary uses, which analyse, predict, and simulate the design and construction, the results of which should feed back to inform the design, producing a much better product and outcome for the client. There is potentially so much information locked away in these primary models, and we're just not tapping into them. And we spend a lot of time, quite rightly, thinking about the information clients want, but what about the information which is also required in design and construction to make better informed decisions and ultimately better facilities? Which do provide real value for clients. And this is where we can do good by reducing the risk of state, helping to make the complexity of the construction process run much smoother, avoiding delay and costly mistakes. In the construction sequencing world, the word rehearsal is used, which I think is great. And we rehearse many things in life, yet building a huge facility, now we'll just play it by ear and make it up as we go along. In this section, I want to talk about how we at BRYAN Digital have taken all this thinking and thought about the information we actually produce on our projects to see how we can communicate it better to help projects run much more efficiently, which ultimately provides more value to our clients. So we have delivery information, which is like the instructions on how to build and manage a facility, so models, drawings, and reports. But there's also the project setup information, which are the instructions for how the project is ran. And from an information management perspective, this tells the team what information needs to be created and how to do it. The information allows us to link this up and link up the delivery information to the project information to give us one joined up process and common language throughout. So what frustrated me was there was many specific software solutions to assist with creating and analysing the delivery information, but very little to help on the project setup side, and in particular from an information management perspective, to not only help break through the complexity, but help communicate it to the project team at the same time. So on previous projects, we use spreadsheets to help manage the complexity, but it's incredibly difficult in spreadsheets to define the relationships. The information is multidimensional and spreadsheets are just flat, disconnected tables. And we see many examples of huge spreadsheets where tables contradict, use different object structures in each one, and are completely detached. So before we can plan the delivery, we do have to tend to rationalise these. And then to communicate this as an industry, we either use huge Word documents or split them down into several annexes, which then all cross-reference each other. And then before you know it, to find something as simple as what the building should be called, you've been through 3 Word documents and 2 spreadsheets, and then it's probably called something entirely different in another document. I'm working on a project where I was on both sides of the fence as the information manager, but also a model author, made me appreciate this so much more. And I thought we have to do something about it. We need one place where all the information is linked in the background so that we can search for what we need. We need a database. And really simply, we have put something together at BRYAN Digital. So we have a content management database to manage the instructional how guidance for the project, which would normally be done through Word documents. And we've called this the Information Hub, and this is the point of access. And then a second relational database to manage the complexity of the what information is required. And this is our information toolkit. And because we're not software developers, we've used off-the-shelf products. So currently for the Information Hub, we're using a software called Notion. And for the toolkit, we're using a software called Airtable. And for us as a business, this is really starting to help us set up and manage our projects better. And we feel we can provide much better service to our clients. So to end this presentation, at BRYAN Digital, we've looked at how all these principles can help us carry out our information management activities in a much better way. From the microscopic nature of the information to how it's described and ordered, and then how it all interlinks using standard schema to connect technology and process and start to remove the headache of interoperability. However, we still think there's something missing, and let's face it, we're humans and we're never going to think like computers, and we shouldn't have to, because that's what sets us apart. We're all random, variable and unique. So how do we plug into this when we all view information in different ways? And this is very much our next area of focus, and we have lots of ideas. The technology very much needs to act as the conduit, connecting people to the information layer and providing the filters required to remove information overload. And in the future, the information layer will evolve. IFC is starting to go through a process of modernisation, and we will make far more use of proper ontologies, true semantic data models and knowledge graphs. And the semantic web, where external data sources can all link together. A report which has just been released about how we will progress the national digital twin within the industry is all built off these principles. And I very much see a Google for construction, and this is the stuff which really excites me. And this is why I believe that the information layer, which we're defining today, very much lays the groundwork for the connected future. And for me, because information underpins everything, it really is the one true asset to rule them all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. That was very good, a very compelling message, very clearly delivered. So that was really useful. So we'll now take questions from the audience. So as usual, if you can type your questions into the question box within GoToWebinar, then between Mark and I, we will ask Emma them on your behalf. First of all, I think really one from me really is, you've talked about the people side of things. One of the things that I see as a big challenge is very often it's the leadership of an organisation who may take a view of, well, we've always done it a different way, why should we change? Any thoughts particularly on how we can get the leaders on board in different organisations?
I suppose in terms of the leaders, it's really demonstrating how it will provide value for them. Without, necessarily going into the nitty-gritty, complex detail, which can put people off. And sometimes, we're all, we kind of all do that. So, yeah, I think it really is how all this affects the bottom line, really, isn't it? Because that's what leaders really are looking for at the end of the day. And that's kind of the challenge. So it's kind of looking at, case studies, where this has happened before, and really pushing that within the industry at all levels, really, to just kind of, just to demonstrate why this is needed.
Yeah, good, thank you. I think, yes, we've got some questions starting. In fact, the rest is coming in quite fast now from attendees. First one from Emmanuel Ude, who has been regular attender all these webinars and always asking intelligent questions. Question from him is really about, is the delivery framework fixed, and how do you manage scenarios where the project deliverable is either regressed or rolled up into master deliverables? Is the model flexible enough to make updates at any stage after it's initially established?
Well, yeah, I mean, on construction projects, things are constantly changing. If it was fixed at the start, that would be lovely. So yeah, I mean, it's just a framework, really. ISO 19650 that helps us really plan the activities, the order of those activities, in particular, what needs to be done pre and post appointment, which tends to get a little bit muddled up at the moment. Especially on the client side, they have a lot more to do in terms of setting the project up before anybody's on board. Whereas what tends to happen is that everything tends to get done once everybody's been appointed, but then you're too late because you might have appointed people that can't deliver what you need. So yeah, it is flexible enough because program is constantly changing. We're kind of at the mercy of what happens on site as well. Things will always go wrong there. So you just have to kind of be aware of that and factor in that kind of contingency.
Yeah, that's good, thank you. Question from Dave Hornby. If you're starting out on the data and information journey, I mean, the image you presented there is a very complex and very rich picture. What would be the priority items to focus on first to ensure that the best digital ways of working start to get adopted?
So for me, it would be definitely understanding if you're asking for information, why you need information. So what are your purposes? How do you use that information on an everyday sort of basis? So, you know, for construction clients, how do they use that information within their own internal businesses to help manage the assets, to help, the wider organisation? So really drill down into your own business and start to really think of how information can be used. And then once those purposes are defined, then actually start to define what information you actually want. And something that's I've been taught over the past few years being in the industry is that's it seems easy, but it's quite incredibly difficult to get that those requirements out of clients. You know, they might just say it quite generically. I want this, you know, a load of building information, but it doesn't really tell you what you need to deliver. So now we're going down the structured information route, especially, we really need to be much more prescriptive, and it's about really defining it across the different layers that I've talked about. And I think for me, that is really the #1 sort of priority, because without that, you can't do everything else. You can't deliver the information, you can't check it, and you won't get the product that you wanted as the output. So yeah, it's all about those inputs.
Yes, and I think also there can be an issue, and you sort of kind of touched on it there, where it may well be that the supply chain are more digitally literate than the client, and therefore there's a bit of an uphill struggle there of trying to get the client to realise they have to be far more specific in what they're requesting.
Yep, definitely.
I think there's another question comes in which is related to this, and it's about the data needs changing during the lifetime of a project. How adaptable are the frameworks that you've discussed?
So of course requirements will change, but for me it's really trying to get as much defined upfront as possible. Especially with clients with big portfolios and estates, you know, they've done this many times. They know what they want to help them with their business. But yeah, it is flexible enough that you know, if there are additional requirements that are required, I mean, we have this quite a lot at the moment actually with sort of design and build procurement models, because what happens is the client will appoint a design team to do the basic design of the asset, and then halfway through the project, the main contractor comes on board to build it, and the main contractor will have requirements as well for their delivery team, and they could contradict what's already, you know, come before. So we do have massive issues with that at the moment, which is one of the reasons I'd like to see, you know, procurement modernised to actually help that. But yeah, so the framework is actually kind of set up for that, to be honest, because we recognise that will happen. Same with clients, they might change their mind towards the end, towards handover even, and it's just really about communicating that. And as soon as you're aware of that, you need to, you know, let the delivery team know so that they can plan for that, because even though it might be as simple as I want this piece of data, it could actually have quite a big knock-on effect to how it's actually created in, you know, the design information, and then how it's actually outputted as well. So yeah, it's like I say, it's flexible enough for that, but try and reduce it as much as possible.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Yeah, I could get into one of my hot topics about procurement, but I think we'll steer clear of that one for this morning.
For another day.
Indeed, yeah, a whole week's worth of debate on that one. Right, so pair of linked questions from Tom Graham and Phil Stacey. So really it's around the linked data, the ontologies and the semantic relationships, and how long have they been part of the proposal, and where did inspiration come from those technology choices, and what's the challenge of using the semantic W3C standards and linked data in the construction industry?
We're very, I see it. I mean, like I said, many people on site are still using drawings. So it's, I think where we are kind of at the moment is still trying to push people towards just using structured information that doesn't even have the relationships defined. But then, like I said, with the Information Management Framework report, which has just been released by the Centre of Digital Built Britain, that's very much based around the idea of ontologies and semantic web. So I kind of see that as sort of the end goal of where we need to get to, but we have got a long way to go on that journey yet. And for me, IFC, which is the schema I described, it's not obviously true ontology, but there are sort of the technologies around that in the background, like IFC OWL, which is the web ontology version of IFC, there as well. So it is all kind of being developed, but we've got a massive journey to go on for that yet.
Yeah, and I think that also gets back into the people issue, and I think also goes back to the point made earlier about clients, getting them on board. Question from Tracy Werder, who again, one of our regular attendees this week, interested in finding out if there's a way to standardise data agreements into contracts around the responsibilities, notification of changes and risks and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and actually last week or the week before, so we have this document called the Information Protocol, so that was updated and released, which is a sort of standard protocol which is meant to be added to contracts to actually help with that. And within construction, really, you do need things in contracts so that they actually will be done. And I think we do need to get better at that and understanding at what sort of levels we need to look at those requirements and how we add those to the contract. And ISO 19650 is all built around the idea of appointments as well. So that very is actually kind of the heart of all this. So there definitely is that sort of aspect to it.
Yes, I mean, you and I are both quite familiar with ISO 19650, and perhaps not all of the audience will be, but I think there are some key principles there that would be transferable to other sectors. I mean, what's your thoughts about transferability of some of the thinking?
Well, definitely, because all industries use information, and it will follow the similar type of pattern. You will always procure suppliers, and you will always need those suppliers to provide you with a certain amount of information. So those basic principles of making sure that you set those requirements before you then go out to select those suppliers, so that they can actually make sure that they can deliver that information. That principle, I think, is definitely transferable across really everything. Yeah, that's good. Agreed on that. Couple of linked questions again that I think work well from sort of Andy Lee and Sally Barrow. Recognising some of the challenges we've got around COVID-19, and there's going to be some real pressures on funding and resources. How do we actually overcome the resistance to change in digital approaches and standards across the organisations? And sort of how do we, any particular challenges actually getting people to buy into the use of an information layer? Yeah, I mean, the construction industry is very well known for being very traditional and not liking change, and anything bad happens or something out of the blue, we do tend to resort to type. and kind of go backwards. Hoping the whole COVID thing isn't going to do that. I mean, it has kind of, in a way, forced us more into digital technologies and exploring that more, with obviously having to work from home. And overall, I think that's actually been very successful in the industry. Obviously, it can't be done when you're on site, but I think it's made you know, more senior people understand the value of technology, and actually how we can start to make this work for us. So I'm hoping that we do drive forward rather than backwards after this, but we'll have to see. And with the whole recession here, it'll be very interesting to see which way we go. Fingers crossed.
It will, and certainly one of my current clients, it's interesting, they've gone from quite a low level of maturity around digital exploitation, and they've taken a leap forward in sort of probably far faster than many other organisations. But I think, yes, there is an increasing awareness of people that they do need to do things a little bit differently, and they need to be more digitally enabled. Question from AE, who's asked a few questions there. I don't know AE's full name, but interested in about data security and how do you secure the data to avoid breaches?
Yeah, well, that's a question on so many levels within this, and security should be considered, yeah, at every level, from, you know, defining the overall project framework to then in terms of the breakdown of the requirements. You know, you can look at security at an overall model level, at you know, at an exchange level. So we have a concept called common data environments, which is where information containers are shared between the project teams so that they can take information themselves for background information, because obviously you can't design in silos, and that whole concept has built within it a governance workflow. So we will, you know, upload information, it has to go through workflows of approvals, and also the CDE is also it's got levels of security to it, so depending on what security groups you're part of, you can only have access to that information. So it all really needs to be planned within the strategies, and there is actually part 5 of ISO 19650, which is due to come out this year, which is all based around security.
Yeah, it was actually, I could almost have popped that question in myself, because I was part of the team involved in developing that part 5, and it's actually out for public consultation at the moment. So if it's an area of interest to you, I think certainly the UK committee who looks after this side of things would be very welcome to get comments from different people who've looked at it. But one of the things to get across is the challenge is it's just a bit wider than a normal cybersecurity challenge, in that you're having to share information with your supply chain in order for them to do their jobs effectively. What are you sharing? Is it something that might have commercial sensitivities? There's some intellectual property attached to it. Will it facilitate some hostile reconnaissance for somebody on site working out a physical weakness? So it's actually a slightly more subtle and challenging challenge than just straight cybersecurity. So there's yes, an interesting little problem there. Just looking to see if there's anything else, and I think probably the final question before we wrap up really is the fact that it goes back to some of the questions we had on the presentations earlier this week about digital twins. So you mentioned CDBB, we had both the Environment Agency and Crossrail already talking about digital twins. How widespread do you think the adoption of digital twins is, and the understanding of what they can potentially deliver to organisations?
I think it's on a very mixed bag of understanding in the industry of what a digital twin is. Like with any of these new concepts, wrong messages tend to get shared quite loudly by certain companies, and yeah, it is a strange one, because we are seeing this in requirements at the moment. Clients are asking for digital twins at the end of it because they think it's a 3D model that they can link possibly linked to things. But obviously we've got the National Digital Twin Programme by the Centre of Digital Built Britain, which actually shares the vision of really what the digital twin will be. And that is supported by the information management framework, which I talked about earlier, about talking about the ontologies and how that's going to work in the future. So for me, I think the true understanding of digital twins is not that well understood, because it is a little bit more different to what we're used to. In the industry, we're very much used to seeing 3D models and drawings, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond, it's more data models, and the connections between them, and helping to connect to other digital twins and creating that network. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of the education of that, of what they actually are. But I think what's coming out at the moment is a good start for that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these things that's a victim of the hype cycle. So it's a buzz phrase that people want to include, a little bit blockchain, Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, and so on. So yes, it is an emerging picture, I think. I think we're sort of through the majority of the questions there. So I think we're about out of time now. So I think what I'd like to do is just sort of thank you, Emma, for a very engaging presentation and a discussion afterwards. So very much appreciate your time, and thank you for your input.
Okay, thank you.